Once again. Welcome, dear friends of Interregional Cooperation. Welcome to this webinar on industrial modernization organized by the Interreg Europe Policy Learning Platform. My name is Thorsten Kohlisch. I'm the thematic manager of the platform, and I'm very glad to welcome you to this second ever webinar hosted by our platform. Indeed, as you know much better than me, industrial modernization is high on policy agendas across Europe, not only in Brussels, but also in your regions. Indeed, your interest in this webinar well reflects the importance of this topic. We have, from all parts of Europe, more than 30 project representatives, innovation experts joining us today. And also in the spirit of interregional cooperation, we have set up our platform team, which will support the webinar, which will support you in the coming 60 minutes. Here in Lille, taking care of the chat and the technicalities, we have my colleagues Camille and Laura. In Warsaw, our web manager, Natalia, and first and foremost, in Nice, in the beautiful south of France, your thematic experts, Mark Pattinson and Karl-Arvid Dorlöf, are waiting for you to guide you through the content of this webinar. But before I give the floor to our thematic experts, to my colleagues, I still would like to do some housekeeping, because this webinar should not be a one-way street, but should give you the possibility to get involved in the discussion. In the upper right corner of your screen, you should see a menu which will help you to get involved in the webinar. First, you can perform a sound check. Of course, you have to make sure that your internet connection is working well. You can also see the list of attendees. And in order to get involved in the discussion later on, you have two possibilities. Further down, you see the tab Chat, and under this tab, you have a box where you can type your question. But don't worry, your question will not be displayed to everyone immediately, but will be sent to our moderator, then shared with me, and we may share your question with the experts, with our external speakers. Furthermore, you have the possibility to raise your hand. You have the respective button also in the menu. This would give you the possibility to share a question vocally, orally with the participants. Of course, you have to make sure, besides your internet connection, that your microphone is activated and working well. Well, but I was not invited to give a long speech. I hope that you will enjoy this webinar. Please get active. Do not hesitate to share your thoughts, comments, and questions. But in order to get started with the hot topic of industrial modernization, I give the floor to our thematic experts, Mark and Karl-Arvid.
Hi, this is Karl-Arvid Dorlöf, one of the thematic experts on the research and innovation team.
And good afternoon, it's Mark Pattinson here. Thank you for the introduction, Thorsten. Unfortunately, it's not very sunny here in the south of France. We're under a lot of water, so we shall hopefully try and bring a ray of sunshine nevertheless to this debate. As Thorsten said, we're going to focus on the theme of industrial modernization. It's not a, let's say, a surprise topic for the majority of you involved in Interreg Europe and other related economic development and innovation projects. As we know, the whole smart specialization process has had a strong focus on ensuring industrial prioritization and sector choices have been at the forefront of your programming period. So I think that's a very important background element. Secondly, I think those who are involved in this industrial modernization and the sort of policy debate will have noticed that the current discussions and consultation proposals for the next programming period place an even higher emphasis on industrial modernization I think smart growth through industrial modernization or even industrial transformation are some of the key concepts that are coming out of DG Regio at the moment. So I think it's an important policy direction, and for those who are perhaps joining us today to learn from the experts, you're in the right place. For those who are already engaged in these processes, hopefully we'll be able to share with you some lessons and pitfalls to avoid. I think that the second aspect for the future programming period will focus it will have a strong inter-regional dimension, and those who are familiar with the Interreg Europe practices will be advantaged, I think, for launching new projects and proposals under the forthcoming programming period. But I think we'll come back to some of the details relating to this theme later on through this call. I'd just like to remind you that we have two experts that will join us shortly. Valeria Bandini from ASTA, the innovation agency from Emilia-Romagna, will give us some regional hands-on experience of both Interreg Europe and industrial modernization, smart specialization platform projects. And we're very happy to have Vincent Duchesne, who's been working in this domain for the last 10 years with the Vanguard partnerships and also supporting DG Regio and the new thematic platform on industrial modernization. But we'll talk more about that shortly when they can present. So Torsten, back to you. Oh, Carl, sorry, back to you, Carl.
Yes. Thank you, Mark. Yes, since the topic of today's webinar is industrial modernization, we'd also like to take the opportunity to say a few words on an upcoming policy brief in line with this topic. And policy briefs are one of the publications published on the Interreg Europe Policy Learning Platform's Knowledge Hub, together with, for example, news articles and other results from our work with the thematic community. So the upcoming policy brief, together with today's webinar, follows the event that was organized between Interreg Europe and the Smart Specialization Platform in Rovaniemi in Lapland earlier in April. And that event was a first step to initiate cooperation between Interreg Europe projects and the partnerships of the Smart Specialization thematic platform for industrial modernization. These two communities share similarities in stakeholder groups and also in thematic interests. And there are several regions already active in both of these communities, so we foresee there's a sizable group of sizable target group that could benefit from the upcoming policy brief. The policy brief should contribute to create momentum for interregional cooperation based on common complementarities and synergies between the Interreg Europe projects and the partnerships of industrial modernization. And in the wider context for this policy brief are also the relevant actions taken by the European Commission. For example, DG Regio and DG Grow have recently launched calls relating to industrial modernization and S3 cooperation via clusters. One important factor in the potential for cooperation is the thematic parallels between Interreg Europe projects and industrial modernization partnerships. And the policy brief will provide an overview of the thematic parallels identified currently, and we believe there will be more of these similarities as partnerships establish new thematic areas, and as there are more Interreg Europe projects approved. thus it seems to be a growing scope for cooperation also in the future. And the brief highlights some of the possible areas of cooperation that could be developed between these communities. Part of the complementarities come from that Interreg Europe projects and industrial modernization partnerships have different focus and address different things, but have a different impact at different stages of the interregional cooperation. Thus, thanks to this interaction between the communities, regions could benefit in their progress, moving through first capacity building steps and then onwards towards co-investment actions. And the policy brief takes this perspective regarding the complementarities and synergies. So based on the thematic similarities that we will see and the areas of cooperation identified, the policy brief is intended to contribute to the next steps of cooperation on industrial modernization. And in order to do this, the policy brief will comment on the role managing authorities could play in pursuing the identified synergies, and will also look into the services that the policy learning platform could provide for both managing authorities, but also other stakeholders. For example, different ways to facilitate and assist in identifying identifying and realizing opportunities along the way. And with that, we'd like to take the opportunity to activate you in the audience, and we will do that by a quick poll. And for this poll, you will have 5 different answers to choose from, and we kindly invite you to choose one of these answers. And you will have roughly a minute or so to submit your answer.
Didn't mean you weren't talking then, was it?
No,
you just pressed.
Okay, Karl-Arvid Marit, you see the results? Maybe very first comment from your side?
Unfortunately.
I'm sorry, we can't see the poll right now.
Okay, the challenge of technicalities. Give us some few seconds and we will make the results visible for everybody.
Our screens disappeared completely.
Yes, now we see them. Thank you.
Okay, well, I think we can see that there's a fairly even spread between the top 4 answers. Nevertheless, the middle theme of involving industrial stakeholders, with almost a third of the votes, comes out top. So I think that would be an interesting point for both Valeria and Vincent to pick up in their presentations. Equal second, we've got mapping regional capabilities and then securing necessary investment efforts. Well, that's quite a positive message, I think, given that the investment challenge is often the one that's put at the top of the list. So that's interesting. Looking for the priorities you share with other regions, 17%, and so it's quite close. And then last but not least, the governance structures that you might have to put in place for project implementation. Perhaps the last one is due to the fact that you have to get through the first 4 before you can even consider the last one. But this gives us some interesting feedback, and it's real time and it's real feedback from practitioners. And perhaps in the follow-up questions with our experts, we might be able to come back to some of them. So I think, Torsten, we can go back to you now.
Depends. Well, dear participants, thank you very much for your participation in this poll. Mark, Karl-Arvid, thank you very much for this first reflection. Indeed, very balanced picture. Karl-Arvid, you have put some buzzwords of our business on the table: complementarities, synergies, interregional cooperation. But all of us know that achieving real benefit, real economic benefit through interregional cooperation is challenging. But we also have some Interreg Europe projects working on solutions. Indeed, one of them is the InnoInfraShare project. Mark, you already mentioned our speaker coming from Italy, Valeria Bandini, the head of the Europe and International Europe of the Innovation Agency of Emilia-Romagna. And mapping is one of the challenges, also confirmed by the participants. Therefore, dear Valeria, please tell us more what you have done in order to facilitate this mapping exercise. Valeria, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you very much. Good afternoon from a sunny Bologna. We are lucky. I will share immediately my presentation to go quickly to what I'm going to share with you. Let's see if it works. Please confirm it does. Can you see it?
Yes, it works perfectly.
Okay. So, hello and good afternoon again to everybody. I was a little bit worried about the poll because, in fact, the word investment, I suppose it was going to attract the highest attention, while fortunately, mapping and involving stakeholders is relevant for the audience and is exactly, I would say, what I'm going to tell you about, sharing the experience we have gained at the regional level and within the framework of the InnoInfraShare project. Here you see a quick list of the topics I'm going to cover, but I go directly to the content of our project. It's InnoInfraShare, whose main objective is to improve the accessibility and the exploitation of research and innovation infrastructure by companies, in particular by SMEs, in our territories. You see there the partnership and the active partners we are collaborating with, and in fact we are working hard to, let's say, make research and innovation infrastructure a real and strong resource for the economic community. I know that the slides will be shared afterward, so I won't go in deep in the definition of what we mean by research and innovation infrastructure. I simply would like to say that, in fact, mapping was the first exercise we carried out within the project. and we identified good practices collected in a booklet that is easily accessible by the Interreg Europe website. So some opportunity to learn more. The mapping exercise carried out within the InnoInfraShare project was partly based and structured around what we did at the regional level. In fact, we worked strongly on, let's say, investigating and collecting information on research and innovation infrastructure of Emilia-Romagna region, taking the opportunity, let's say, to create a pool of information, let's say, addressing the challenges of Emilia-Romagna's smart specialization strategies, and taking also the opportunity to start or deepen the relations and the dialogue with the stakeholders in the territory. In fact, we collected information, we carried out a kind of desk analysis, but also a field analysis, taking, as I'm saying, the opportunity to work with people in the territory. We got amazing results, I would say. You can see some numbers on the slide. And more than that, we were able to identify 3 main priority areas that, thanks also with the dialogue with stakeholders, were, let's say, connected under a big, really big umbrella that is the one of big data that has been considered in our region a strong asset to be exploited. In fact, we've focused on big data, and another mapping there again was carried out to gather precise information on figures, but also expertise, technologies and facilities, and to work with the local actors to create what has proven to be possible, that is to create a community, what we call a big data community, that enabled us also to carry out a further investment afterward. We give a lot of importance to mapping, as I'm saying, and oops, I've lost here I am, talking about industrial modernization. We must talk about Industry 4.0. And again, we carried out more or less 1 year ago an extensive mapping of regional Industry 4.0 regional assets. Let's say, looking for, again, information, but more than that, for people and for experiences, activities, projects, competencies, and everything that could create a kind of critical mass on Industry 4.0 topic. You will see when, in case you will look at the presentation afterward, that there are some links that you can use to go in deep and understand better. But let's go to the contents, let's say, of our experience and the importance to map, to gather information, to learn, in fact, but also to connect and to create, let's say, the communities. In fact, the mapping, it's an extraordinary tool for learning and then acting, because in fact you get a precise knowledge of what you have, but also you have the opportunity to connect, to let's say, create the links with stakeholders and to involve them and to, let's say, strengthen the mutual knowledge. And in our case, talking about infrastructures, as I was saying at the beginning, in that case, in particular, integrate better infrastructure and those kind of resources to innovation, in the innovation ecosystem. Then, very relevant, it's an opportunity to mobilize and engage actors and to join forces. In fact, that's relevant. That's relevant at the regional level, but it's more than relevant if you scale up somehow, and we will say something. I will say something more about that later. If you work at the European level, when mapping and carrying out this kind of activity in a collaborative way, involving actors, you have also the opportunity to discuss and work with the stakeholders on priorities and common objectives. This is at the regional, but also at the interregional level. That is what we are doing, in fact, within our project also. Then you create opportunities to collaborate, but also to develop joint new actions. So to go shortly to the lessons learned that I would like to share with you. First, you end up discovering the unknown somehow. I was mentioning the exercise on big data, and in that case, we realized that we have in our region the 70% of Italian capacity in terms of computational capacity, let's say, storage and processing of data. Then, as I was already saying, you have the opportunity to involve and also give visibility to your stakeholders and create the community, create the networking space. And again, that's happening or happened in our region, but it's happening also thanks to interregional collaboration projects. You have the opportunity to share views and ideas grounded on real actors and real facts in the region. And you can provide the policymakers with bottom-up views also to orient their investments. Of course, this is relevant, and we have carried out all those activities for the implementation, in connection with the implementation of the smart specialization strategy, and also to get prepared to scale up, as I was saying earlier, at the European level. In fact, we are experiencing the participation to the European smart specialization platforms, in particular within the industrial modernization one. And we recognize that mapping and learning and sharing with the partners is really relevant and enables also to act faster, to take somehow easier decision, or to take decisions that are easy to be taken because you have already the community in place and the connections and the relations for developing new services, joint actions, and interregional collaboration. That is what we are aiming at, let's say, also connecting what we are doing within Interreg Europe projects and what we are developing within the industrial modernization platforms and in general the SSP platform, European platform. So my message is that sharing commitment, competencies and skills based on mapping make the difference. Thank you very much.
Perfect, Valeria. Thank you very much for this clear and inspiring presentation about the mapping exercise you have done in your region. Thanks a lot for that.
Thank you.
And maybe with this input, the input given by Carl, the little survey at the beginning, and your insight into the mapping done in Emilia-Romagna, we can give the floor to our participants. Let us see if they have first comments, questions, which they would like to share with you, with our thematic experts. You remember, dear participants, you have two possibilities to get involved. Either you type your question under chat, or in the very meaning of the sentence, you raise your hand and share your question orally.
While waiting, if I may.
Please, Valeria.
Simply, I would like to say that, I mean, this is a kind of short webinar and maybe questions may raise afterwards. So let me say that I'm ready and keen to keep on answering in the case, or exchanging more than that afterwards.
Okay. Thanks for this, Valeria. Of course, taking the floor at the first one is always difficult, but we received first questions from Lorenzo Sabatini. I will read the question for you, Valeria, and then I will give you the floor. What about training, particularly concerning SMEs and entrepreneurs? Do you consider it?
Yes, yes, of course. I mean, if you look at, I don't know where Lorenzo is from, but if he's Italian, he may know that Emilia-Romagna as a region is placing a lot of emphasis on training, on educational activities, etc. And thank you for the question. In fact, it gives me the opportunity to underline that in fact, we, based on the Industry 4.0 mapping and the network that we created, we were able to act faster in participating to a call, a national call actually, within the Industry 4.0 national plan. And we won. We are very happy. We were on the podium, so best project. A project that is very much based on training companies. I mean, the aim of the project is creating a competence center, so-called, with different components. But the first and most important, in fact, is dedicated to training to companies. And thanks to the network of actors that we were able to mobilize, we were able also to create training contents for companies. So definitely my answer is yes, we consider that is very relevant, is maybe one of the most critical aspects to be considered, talking about industrial modernization or industrial transition, with all issues related to employment, etc. That would be very long, very let's say, strategic topic to be worked on.
Okay, thank you very much, Valeria, for this very clear and comprehensive answer. By the way, indeed, Lorenzo is from Tuscany. He just added this information to his question. Thanks, Lorenzo, for raising the question. And indeed, now we have 2 hands raised. Therefore, I will ask Natalia to unmute David. David, could you take the floor, briefly also say, where are you from? And then share your question with the experts and with Valeria.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. David Fernandez from Esprit in the Basque Country with Juan Domingo Labarri. We are in the clusters area. Interesting point you made regarding this Industry 4.0 capacities catalog. Here in the Basque Country, one of the jobs of the digital innovation hub has been to create or to activate a connected network of Industry 4.0 technologies and assets. And one of the outputs has been a catalog. Now there is a challenge on how to get SMEs, to facilitate the use of these 4.0 assets by companies and in particular by SMEs. What is your experience in this regard?
If I understand correctly, maybe I understand that your question is, yes, okay, mapping and getting the information and creating the catalog, but what next? Yes, catalog, either paper or web catalog, is not enough. It's not enough, so you need also the appropriate actors in the territories to help companies to access the facilities or the technologies or the infrastructure that you have in your territory or that you can find elsewhere. This is exactly what we are working on within the InnoInfraShare project, or let's say to a certain extent is what we are dealing with within that project, because we are recognizing that we are recognizing the importance of the facilitators, let's call them, and in different regions they have different names, but the importance of, I wouldn't say intermediaries, because it's not a matter of intermediate, but to work aside, to work closely with the company to help it to get access to the right technologies and facilities, but at the same time, the facilities and the owner, let's say, of the infrastructure must be prepared and must have the appropriate access rules, but also capacities and skills. Again, here we are with the skills topic to offer the companies the appropriate services, or to start the appropriate activities, collaboration activities with the company. Is it what you were asking for? So just to answer, in our experience, the catalog and the result of the mapping is a kind of a raw material that you have to work on, thanks to people. Then people matters always.
Yes, this is the starting point, let's say.
Okay.
Then, if I may add one word, then we leave the floor to the others. For example, voucher schemes or some funding for companies, let's say lowering the access cost would be also useful, and has been proven useful in other regions and in my region as well. I stop, sorry.
Thank you very much, Valeria. Bye.
Okay.
Thank you, bye.
Thank you very much. Then maybe the time has come to bring in our thematic experts again, before we give the floor to our second speaker. Mark, Karl Arvid, you may briefly reflect on the presentation given by Valeria and also the discussion we had afterwards.
Yeah, thank you again, Valeria, for sharing those thoughts with us. I think what I've retained in particular is that mapping isn't an end in itself. Mapping needs to have an action orientated. It's part of a process, and you need to ensure that you're doing it for the right reasons and not simply to, as David said, you have a catalogue, it needs to be used for exploitation. And I think the interregional dimension is one aspect in which the mapping process needs to be open from the beginning, collecting the data in a format that can be shared with other stakeholders, whether it's via clusters, as David said, via technology transfer or other technology diffusion agents. But I think I particularly liked your mapping, collective learning, but we want to do something with it. So I think that's an interesting lesson that we can take from your presentation. But I'm aware that time is running, and I think your offer for further exchange with these particular participants is something we will pursue with other questions that we've got. So I think, Torsten, back to you, and I think our next speaker is waiting.
Exactly. But just to emphasize, Mark, and to leave from Ghent in Flanders, Belgium, we have not forgotten about your question, which you have submitted via the chat, but we made use of the invitation announced by Valeria earlier on. Valeria, Leaf from Ghent still has raised the question, which we will share with you after the session, making sure that the answer will be given. At the same time, of course, the moderator always has to keep an eye on the timing. And therefore, as you said, Mark, we would like to give the floor to our second expert, to our second speaker today, Vincent Duchesne, an independent expert. Vincent, you have been working, or you are working, on industrial modernization partnerships. And I have to admit, when I read the title of your presentation, well, you create expectations, because you would like to give an overview about the challenges and also the successes of industrial modernization partnerships. Vincent, the floor is yours. Still have to switch on the mic, and then we can get started.
Voila, I was muted by the organizer. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Vincent Duchesne here from ID Consult in Brussels, in sunny Brussels as well. So we have more sun in Brussels than you, Mark. I'm very sorry for that. Do you see my presentation?
Mike, yes, it's perfectly visible, but you just still have to activate the presentation mode.
Is it visible like this?
Yeah, it's perfect.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm beginning. Good afternoon, everybody. I was asked to tell you a couple of things about some lessons from our recent experience in coaching cross-regional partnerships for industrial modernization. So if you allow me, I'm going to start and I will follow this structure very quickly. First, our references, basically why I am here. Then something on the common process and methodology that we followed. You will see there is mapping, but there is much more than that. Mapping is indeed, as you said, Valeria, not an end in itself. And then I would like to share you some lessons, what I would call 3 prerequisites or conditions for success when you want to kick off cross-regional partnerships. First of all, to get the scoping, the focus of your partnership right. When you are doing the mapping and the matching between regions' capabilities to involve the right people at the right time. That's very important. And in terms of funding opportunities, start soon enough and adjust whenever needed, as long as your cases and opportunities are evolving. So for each of these conditions, I will have some clear cases and examples. Let me start. So about the references, so that's our major recent references. So as you can see, we have been coordinating and supporting many cross-regional partnerships in the context of the Vanguard initiative, for instance, since 2014. We are coordinating the cross-regional partnership on 3D printing, 23 EU regions, on nanoelectronics, 14 EU regions, as well as we supported the pilot on biomass. And since 2017, we have been coordinating or supporting 9 partnerships under the platform on industry modernization, the one on agro-food and the one on energy. On industry modernization, for instance, we supported the partnership on Industry 4.0. We worked a lot with the colleagues from Castilla y León, Valencia, Catalonia, and some other colleagues, but also the one on photonics, led by the Germans and the Dutch colleagues, as well as one on sports innovation. We supported one on agro-food, as well as all 5 ongoing partnerships on the energy platform, for instance, the one on the smart grids, for instance, led by PACA in France. And we are about to start, basically we will start this month to coordinate 3 other cross-regional partnerships that are going to be launched in the context of the pilot actions launched by DG Regio. What we did also in the past on top of that is that we did a lot of studies on industry modernization. So we are doing a big projects for DG Grow together with the colleagues of Fraunhofer, Carsa and Technopolis on monitoring industrial modernization. And this is basically a feasibility study on new statistical mechanisms, statistical tools to better monitor industrial modernization in the future. We designed and implemented the European Observatory on Key Enabling Technologies for the European Commission, and we are doing now a similar exercise for the government of Taiwan. And we just finalized a large study on SME access to CATS technology infrastructure, mapping capabilities from research and technology centers and organizations and the way they offer access to their SMEs. Mapping, but also comparing, assessing business models used by different RTOs, big RTOs, in the way they try to serve the needs of SMEs. And finally, we also give some policy advice advice. For instance, we advised the Commission on the next generation of the CATS policy under FP9, under Horizon Europe. We did a big study on funding needs for cross-regional projects for industrial modernization, and this was basically the origin of a new Interreg mechanism which will be deployed after 2020. I will tell more about that in a few minutes. So these are our references. Then, second point, about the common process and methodology for cross-regional. We have tested since basically 3-4 years, together with all these cross-regional partnerships, a basic common methodology. It has been tested and verified, and basically it contains more or less 7 big steps. First of all, to define the vision of your cross-regional partnership. If you want to start a cross-regional partnership, what are you focusing about? Is that industry modernization? Okay, but is that about raising awareness amongst SMEs only? Or do you want also to effectively, operationally attract SMEs to a connected network of demonstrators and technology infrastructure? This is not the same thing. And depending on what your vision is and what the market failure is and where you want to intervene, actually, you will be targeting different tools and funding mechanisms. So this is very important to have a clear-cut vision from the very beginning. Then follows, in my opinion, the most important step of all 6 steps, the definition of an operational scope. Why? Because if you have a partnership on Industry 4.0, and if you want to map capabilities in Industry 4.0 between regions, actually you are going to map everything. And you are going to map at a very high level, which means that you will not be able to detect any meaningful synergies between regions. So you need to define, to get down to a lower level of granularity where you find potential meaningful synergies. I will give you an example on that, very concrete. Third step, the mapping. Once you have defined the scoping, you start mapping the regional ambitions and challenges, the regional actors and their capabilities, infrastructure, projects, and so on, and maybe most important, the missing links between the regions. And this is where basically our experience with the Observatory on Key Enabling Technologies and the other big projects, the study work is very important because we have very detailed typologies of materials, product groups, technologies, which allow us to implement very detailed mapping at a low level of granularity and to find the right things. Then comes the matching, because I can assure you, you can do a very good mapping. You run very fastly against the limits of a survey and a mapping. So then comes the other step, which is the matching. And then you need specific experts to interpret the data from the mapping between the regions and to further check whether these synergies are really actual complementarities. So matching is very important. Then at the time you are also screening adequate funding tools, and once you have found the adequate funding tool, you can design a project and have it launched. Okay, this is very broadly said, the common process and methodology, but I can assure you behind every single of these 6 steps, there are pages and pages of a handbook that we are writing for DG Regio, with very concrete examples and steps to be taken and do's and don'ts. Let me get then to the 3 prerequisites or conditions for success that I have selected for today. That's only a few examples, but first the scoping. Get the focus of your partnership right. Why is that important? Let me give you the example of the 3D printing pilot of the Vanguard initiative. Basically, you have to follow a kind of funnel approach. Starting broad, you are starting from additive manufacturing or 3D printing or Industry 4.0. As I said, if you look for complementarities between regions at that level, I can assure you, you will lose your time. So you need to get first down to an operational focus operational scope to the right level of granularity. And what we did, for instance, for the 3D printing pilot, we defined 7 areas with such an operational scope. And this is only one that you can see here. You get down, for instance, to 3D printing applications of automotive and machinery. At that level, it is still far too broad because you have different materials, methodologies, technologies. And actually, if you map at that level, you will find companies operating in totally different value chains. So with no complementarity possible. So you need to get down towards, for instance, hybrid components using metals and carbon fibers for lighter structural components. And at that level, you can start mapping. And I can assure you, it is certainly not too precise because you can cover a lot of suppliers to the automotive industry, but also a lot of suppliers to the machinery and packaging industry. So basically at that level, you still have a coverage of a few thousands of SMEs in different regions. I can assure you. So this is one of the important missions you have, important steps you have to take, get down to the right level of granularity. Second prerequisite or condition for success, involve, when you are mapping and matching things, involve the right people at the right moment. This picture is coming from the partnership on smart grids led by PACA in France with, I believe, 12 other EU regions like Puglia, like Bretagne, and I think Pays Basque is also leading, Basque country. So here you have a mapping exercise. We started from the red block in the middle on smart grids. We defined a few major areas, which are the blue ones, and for the blue ones, we got down to the green ones, where for each one a mapping exercise was conducted. And for each green sub-area, we defined complementarities between regions. For instance, for power to gas conversion, for the realization or the testing of microgrids or off-grids. Microgrids, for instance, is a grid which can be shut off from the remaining grid, electrical power grid, in case of a hospital, for instance. There you have, for instance, at this moment, cities from the regions testing microgrids, whether they can deploy that in their own city. But what is important here is that you need to involve the right people at the right moment. That means at the beginning, regional policy officers, because this is the link with the regional priorities of your region and the regional ambitions of your region. Then you get down as quickly as possible during and just after the mapping, you involve cluster managers and regional technological expertise. That means the knowledge on the technology, on the industry, and on the other one, the knowledge of your company population in the region. A cluster manager in the right area should know what SMEs need, what his companies need. And what you need also after that, but not too early, is the check by companies. Meaning you need to involve to get some concept notes presented to some test companies, suppliers, but also OEMs, end users, different points of the value chains, preferably not competitors, to get a kind of validity, reality check about the projects you want to set up between regions. And usually you get a return to a feedback on the concept notes, and the concept notes have to be rewritten or revised substantially. But this is a very important thing. The important thing is, do not try to involve industrial stakeholders too early. You need first to have a minimum selling point. That's the point. The poll at the beginning was very clear. Involving industrial stakeholders is an issue. I fully understand you, but this is the point of what I'm saying here. Do not try to involve them. Involve them when you have a specific point and something to be sold to them. And the third prerequisite or condition for success, About funding opportunities, you should start as early as possible. As soon as you have your focus, as soon as you have your key areas of collaboration, start thinking about it. And this implies thinking much broader than Interreg only, of course. It is about Horizon 2020, LIFE. It is about ERDF funding, if with or not the Article 70 implementation. It is about Interreg, but it is also about combination of own regional funds. You know, there is nothing in Europe that forbids you or forbids regions to combine regional funds independently from ERDF or Horizon 2020 or other things. And basically, one of the first industrial projects we had in the Vanguard initiative was just a combination of regional funds with Italian public money, Swedish public money, 2 Italian companies, 1 Swedish companies, and half of the public Swedish money being spent in Italy to buy in capabilities and services at the benefit of Swedish companies. So this is basically not forbidden to do so, to do this combination. And that is to start as soon as possible to have an offer once you have the concrete projects ready. And by the way, things are changing. I imagine you have seen the official proposal for regulation of the European Commission of last Tuesday, I think. There is a new Interreg instrument coming, a kind of Interreg D, with a total value of almost 1 billion for the next programming period, especially, and because they refer clearly to the Vanguard initiative, especially to scale up regional projects by connecting technology infrastructure between regions and having companies making use of this connected network of technological capabilities. This was my third and last prerequisite or condition for success, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm ready here. This is my contact. We will not have time to discuss maybe a lot of things because the clock is ticking, but I'm also happy to follow up by email later on. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Vincent, for this presentation, for these very clear and straightforward recommendations. And indeed, clock is ticking, as you said, but still, we should not miss the opportunity to give the floor once again to our participants. Maybe some questions or comments were already popping up in your heads when listening to the prerequisites or conditions for success presented by Vincent. If not, I would have one question for you, Vincent. You have gained experience with many interregional partnerships. Would you say that successful partnerships actually share common characteristics, maybe those success factors which you have just highlighted?
Well, on top of the 3 prerequisite or successful condition, I think that governance is also an issue. Governance and commitment, of course. Commitment in terms of the lead regions and the people involved. But as I said, I mean, basically, if you want to do a good job, you want to mobilize resources, and you need to mobilize different capabilities and competences. I was speaking about cluster managers, technology experts, policy people. So you have at least this holy trinity needed at regional level, the triple helix, and that requires mobilizing some resources. So that's what we see, for instance, in many of these partnerships is that you have more or less half of the regions, I would say, very well organized and putting its resources into it, and these while 50% watching at the window, and but the very motivated and well committed regions are, of course, getting most of the benefits of that cooperation.
Okay, thank you, Vincent. And maybe with these words, I can give the floor again to our thematic experts, to Mark and Carl Arvid. Just confirming once again that all questions which have been submitted via the chat, not answered yet, will be tackled by our experts, by our speakers afterwards. But now, to reflect, wrap up, and conclude, Mark and Carl Arvid, the floor is yours again.
Okay.
Thank you, Thorsten.
Thank you, Vincent, for that very clear presentation. I think that you're able to say there is would be of use, I think, in terms of putting into place some new thinking in the regions that are currently at least listening today. I certainly would retain, let's say, 3 points from our two discussions that we've had, presentations that we've had this afternoon. I think the first one is that there are an array of methodological tools that have been tested. Vincent even used the word tested and verified. So if there was ever a reason not to reinvent the wheel, this is one. I think interregional cooperation, industrial modernization or industrial transformation are themes that have been discussed and have been worked on. I think there are over 100 regions that are engaged in the different smart specialization thematic platforms. So certainly use those resources, and you can join those partnerships. As Vincent said, there are 50-50 balances between regions that are active and participating in these projects, and 50 who are let's say, watching, hopefully not watching the train leave the platform, but actually participating in with their resources. But I think that's one of the challenges that regions do face, is in terms of mobilizing the right people at the right time. So it's not just about mobilizing the external actors, it's about getting your people to attend these meetings. You know, when there is a partnership meeting, we've seen it, if regions aren't there, the sort of empty chair phenomenon can be a barrier for, you know, engaging in partnership building, because that's where the value added is. So I think the methodological tools are there. You need to commit resources and engagement. I mean, there is, apart from the few pilot projects, there is no additional money for industrial modernization platforms. That brings me on to Interreg, and I think the Interreg Europe project community have been able to access resources, and we've seen recently some of the new Interreg Europe projects under Call 3 have close alignment with the industrial modernization projects, partnerships in the domain of sports, for example, in medtech, in other fields, advanced manufacturing. So I think the industrial modernization brief that policy brief that Carl Arvid mentioned at the beginning of this presentation should, let's say, deepen your understanding of some of the synergies on a thematic basis that will be of relevance for constructing partnerships. The last issue, which I think came out on top of the poll, is this question of the industrial stakeholders. And I think Valeria talked about the SMEs in terms of the engagement and the collective learning process that's gone through in Emilia-Romagna. Vincent said, don't bring them in too early. But on the other hand, you want to test your scoping paper reality, you know, the market test, the reality check. So I think using the intermediaries, the technology transfer people, the cluster intermediaries, the business associations, the sector associations, those have to be engaged quite early to make sure you're on the right track, that when you do deliver your first outlines of cooperation projects, co-investment, if we go right to the end of this process, that you will have some let's say, relevance and interest from the business sector and the SMEs in particular. So using intermediaries would seem to be an interesting part of the process of focusing on your industrial modernization priorities. Last but not least, I mentioned it in my introduction, I think the industrial modernization or the transformation and the desire to enhance smart growth in Europe means that all of you who are discussing and engaging with your regional partners on the path of industrial modernization, using innovation and interregional cooperation as a driver, you've made the right choice. I mean, there is going to be additional funding. In the work that we've done, the Lapland workshop that Carl Arvid mentioned, one of the biggest barriers is, well, we've got the ideas, but we don't have the funding. Where is the funding to support this? Well, you still have to wait a bit longer. And as Vincent mentioned, there are some new instruments. They are still at the consultation phase, but it's likely that the interregional dimension, so building on your Interreg Europe experiences, building on your industrial modernization partnership experience, will offer and create funding opportunities or access funding opportunities. So I would urge you to continue the work you're doing on the industrial modernization and interregional cooperation to prepare the ground, and prepare the ground with your political partners, your policymakers, and your actors on the ground, because I think there is a lot of new and interesting actions that will enable you to scale up and really create some economic impacts in your region. So that's all I wanted to say, and I think it's up to us to say a big thank you to our two speakers, a big thank you to our Interreg Lille-based team who've ensured this. Hopefully you can still hear me to the end of this presentation. Thank you to my colleague here, Carl Arvid, and we will follow up on any of the questions that you've put forward through the chatter, and the policy brief that we're currently finalizing will certainly reflect some of the very good comments and let's say insights that our two experts gave to us. So apologies for being a bit over the time slot, but unless Torsten's going to add any further words, we wish you a pleasant afternoon and look forward to you joining us on the next webinar or in the next Policy Learning Platform workshop. So thank you again for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Have a nice day.